Mr. Carter, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks. Good to be with you.
Um, we are here today having the inauguration of the Global Center for Combating Terrorist Extremism and Terrorism, and also the conference that's going to be taking place also today. And having said that, has the world reached to a common definition for terrorism?
I think there is quite a broad agreement about the terrorist groups that are today a danger to civilization, and there's a great coming together. There's the coalition the U.S. leads, which is taking Mosul and Raqqa. I think will be victorious. That deals with ISIS. We all are standing strong against Iran here in the Gulf, which supports some extremism. But I think it's harder for anyone to, and by the way, I should also say that Saudi Arabia is leading an Islamic coalition that it is created. So there's broad awareness of the current issues with terrorism, including those who need to be defeated and destroyed. I think what the conference is about, and is a very healthy thing for people to think about, is what comes next. Because unfortunately, extremism is something that is part of human nature. It's likely to pop up in forms in the future, even it has in the past, that are different from today's. And it's important for civilized countries and for people who are responsible for protecting their people and letting them live full lives, that we all be constantly thinking about what groups might come next and really doing what is possible to prevent new waves of terrorism from emerging.
Right. And beside military operations, what international cooperation do you think will put actually an end, a solid end to terrorism in the world and around the world?
Let's take one example in Iraq today, in Mosul. ISIL will be expelled from Mosul, but the task thereafter, where I think that not just the United States, but other countries, including Saudi Arabia and other ones that it has in its coalition, can help the local people of that region, who are quite mixed in their ethnicity and so forth, to come together and live together in peace. That'll require some economic and some political assistance, which I think the countries led by Saudi Arabia can make an important contribution. That's one way that they can contribute. And another way that the coalition contributes is because it has the moral authority of Islam behind it. We Westerners, non-Islamic countries, can't speak with authority to the abuse of Islam by people for evil ends that are not part of Islamic tradition and culture. We can't speak authoritatively to that matter. Saudi Arabia and the country it leads in that coalition can.
And President Trump is going to attend the inauguration of the Global Center for Combating Extremism and Terrorism. What makes that center so special?
Well, I think two things. First is it matches in its research agenda and in the influence of its research products, the Islamic coalition idea, which is for Muslims to speak to the issue of the distortion of their religion by people who really have other aims, who just want power or money. That's one way that it can contribute. And the other way is by feeding the Islamic coalition, which is forming and deciding what its action plan is, with good ideas, particularly, as I said, in the economic and political realm.
And what are your personal expectations for this center, and how far do you think it will reach in its goals and objectives?
Well, I certainly hope it will flourish and become very influential and a source of important thinking, both on the moral side and preventing terrorism, and also on the economic and political side, because that's essential to create orderly societies in which extremism doesn't have an opportunity to flourish.
And Mr. Carter, from cyber terrorism into real on-ground terrorism, how do you see that transformation?
Well, the use of the internet and the cyber domain, and particularly social media, by terrorists is new. It's very dangerous. We see the ability of groups that really are quite bizarre and barbaric amplify their message and their membership by using social media. And they're able to attract some distressed or psychotic person or sociopathic person in an entirely different society. And that's the kind of reach that didn't used to be available to terrorist groups. Now, I think governments and countries, US and Saudi Arabia being among them, are getting better at countering that phenomenon. But it just shows that as technology changes and the structure of society changes, that the way that aberrant and pathological people can try to use new techniques to endanger the rest is an important problem. And those of us those who have responsibility for security need to stay up to date too.
We do agree on that they are targeting psycho people, or they have people who have psychotic problems. But also on the other hand, we do see some stable people, and basically youngsters and teenagers. How do you think they're able to reach to those people, knowing that they're stable and living a healthy, stable life?
Well, it's the same thing as for people who are less stable, but somebody who seems to be living a normal life, but is at that time of life when it's easy to become entranced by something. That's a phenomenon that is, common in youth everywhere, and it creates a vulnerability in which they may find themselves for a time attracted to something that they really shouldn't be attracted to.
Now, terrorism has been striking the Middle East for decades now, almost. And countries have been putting, including Saudi Arabia, have been putting a lot of money, weapons, and centers like this that we're today in. What do the leaders actually really need to end this taboo, or this strike, or this terrorism strike in the region?
Well, I think a final end to terrorism. As long as there are human beings, there will be strange and evil human beings. So I think that terrorism per se is likely to be part of the human condition, and something that civilization has to combat all the time. And by the way, it doesn't just arise in the Middle East, and it doesn't just arise in Islam. So it's not going to be ended. I do believe that ISIL and the ISIL phenomenon is going to be defeated, not just in the territorial sense, but also shown to be not a state, not a successful thing, not something to join, but something that is defeated.
Now, Mr. Carter, you said that it is global, the terrorism. We all know it's a global issue around the world. How do the terrorists actually communicate worldwide, having all this intelligence around the world and all these monitoring around the world?
Well, it's a good question, and they use the internet. They use encrypted communications. They use very perishable communications, so it's very difficult for the institutions, the intelligence and law enforcement institutions of civilized countries like ours to stay ahead of this. And that's not a challenge that our predecessors in generations past had. And we're going to have to simply figure out how to overcome that.
I have my last question, Mr. Carter, and I'm sorry to take all the time from you. Crime and terrorism is a topic that has been discussed in the conference. What is common between between terrorism and crime?
Well, there are connections. The terrorist groups use criminal networks to smuggle people and goods, to launder money. And it goes the other way. There are some criminals who brand themselves as ISIL, but they're criminals. And they're not from the countries in which that they're terrorizing necessarily. Some are. They're not necessarily from Iraq or Syria. They can be from China or Russia or Europe or Arab countries or even the United States. Very small numbers from the United States, but even from the United States. So there is a very strong and very dangerous mixture between criminality on the one hand and terrorism on the other. And what that means is that law enforcement and defense authorities have to, in their job of combating these things, go after both.
Thank you very much, Mr. Carter.
Thank you. Good to be with you.